as it is right now. All right. Would love to hear more about Jaroo from you, sir. Well, Giroux was the druid of the grove when we playtested Hamlet. Hamlet got playtested quite extensively. It was our first foray into doing a whole village, town, little microcosm, economy, etc. And so there were a lot of sessions, and I only made about half of them. See, I lived 11 miles away in Delavan, and I had a daughter, and my wife was pregnant with our son during part of that time as well later on. So I wasn't always able to make every session in the playtest. And those were the ones, of course, when they made up the dirty stanzas for the Tim the Lusty Druid song that they did. I played Giroux as a druid in that neutral, neutral, favoring nature, and we were testing druids also, and because it was a new character class that had become wildly popular. So it's really all I can tell you about it. I went on a couple of expeditions. I did a couple of in the Grove encounters. Really not much more to say. I'm sorry. It was playtest character. So a lot of things that might have been memorable in another circumstance were simply something that was noted down and modified for or adjusted for perhaps the next time. Okay, here's someone's response to my thing about metal dice. Don't get me wrong. Again, some of these are absolutely gorgeous sculptures. The practicalities of jagged metal dice and taking the edge off the sculpture or pitting the surface you roll. Surface for rolling metal dice. Custom crapshoot table, dice tray table with at least triple layers of felt over cork or rubber or vinyl and plenty of rubber bumpers like of a pool table. Well, yeah, Jesus, you know, strap that to your back and take it to games with you. There's no reason that you couldn't use this. A old wooden cigar box with a piece of felt in the bottom. Now, if you're looking for the dramatic effect of watching them spin over and over and over and over down the table under your spotlights, well, you'll have to make other arrangements for that. Wouldn't work on a regular pool table because the bumpers curve under, and any four-siders particularly would be prone to sticking underneath the bumpers. And quite frankly, you'd put little pits that you probably wouldn't notice for a long time in the felt, but what the slate would do to the points on the dice would be more egregious, I would think. Can you talk about the decisions, a bit about the decisions in producing the first D&D miniatures? Did I have much interaction with the sculptors? All right. TSR went into minis about the time I was leaving. I knew they were looking in it. I knew who they were talking to. I knew who they weren't talking to. And as it happened, when I left, I ended up working hand in hand with one of the minis companies. Now, there were really only two good choices for TSR to go, two good companies to try. Grenadier, because they were newer and more willing to try new things. They were eager to grow. And there was Ralpartha. Minifigs was considered still too English, too difficult to converse with, because remember, we're using snail mail and having to send letters across the ocean. And they were the U.S. their U.S. branch was not able of committing to those decisions. And then there was Duke down in Texas with his figures that became Heritage Minis. They were Der Kriegsspillers first. And Duke was making some neat stuff, but frankly, Duke's stuff, minifigs could have carved about the same as Duke's. Grenadier had some better sculptors, and Ralpartha had two of the finest sculptors working in figures anywhere in the world at the time. The reason TSR didn't go with Ralpartha was an immense cock-up of miscommunications. Ralpartha came to Gen Con with 3 figures: the Wizard on the Quarter casting, the Death Dealer, and the High Guard. And maybe that looks like a wizard drawing a sword from behind his back. And then they had the High Guard with the spears, and the spears were made of metal with lead tips, which was a mind blower. And it was a personality misunderstanding. Glenn Kidd is a very sure of himself man. Glenn Kidd was much younger then and less sure of himself. And Glenn's misfortune was that when he got nervous, he kind of smirked. And it was simply a case of nerves with Glenn. I saw it in other occasions. That was just a nervous reaction. Some people giggle and laugh when they get real stressed. He kind of smirked. And he and Gary, when they first met at the con, rubbed each other the wrong way. Glenn didn't know who this old guy was because they hadn't met yet. And Gary didn't know who this young pup was who was smirking at him with these amazing figures. And that was that. There was no working with Ralpartha, which I think is the great tragedy of TSR and their miniatures lines, because Ralpartha is still doing some of the best stuff in the world. Their main prime sculptor, Tom Meyer, is still doing amazing work for them and for other miniatures companies. And they would have had some astonishing figures. Now, I'm not saying Grenadier was bad. They weren't. They were better than Minifig. They were better than a lot of Duke's figures. Heritage, as it became. Yeah, I have to keep remembering that. Sorry. And they had some people that were willing to take direction. And they did quite well. I look at some of the original sets of the Adventurers set, and I think of what it might have looked like if Dennis Mize, who's now deceased, or Tom Meyer, the two Partha sculptors, would have done with them. There would have been very little comparison, because there was very little comparison at the time with what they were turning out and what Grenadier was turning out. Grenadier was turning out playable pieces, and they were nice. I'm not knocking Grenadier, and when I was friends with one of their sculptors, who I thought still do, as far as I know, does great animals. Just really, really good at capturing animals. And it's one of those things, a missed occasion. Grenadier was making fine stuff for putting on the table on your big hex grid and moving around and all that. Partha was making stuff that once you painted it, you really didn't care to handle it all that much. Or you handled it by the base or whatever. It was a step above. And who did the actual negotiating from TSR? I don't know. Grenadier, it was the two owners directly, because Gary had initiated it with them. During the drafting or brainstorming of the first edition AD&D rules, do you recall any of the rationale behind Gary's inclusion of half-elves, half-orcs, and gnomes? And what about the unique design of the Bard class? I may not recall correctly, but it was different from the version in Dragon. Well, yes, that's because this was advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And until it came out, everything else was original Dungeons and Dragons. That was part of the marketing point, but it was also part of the refinement of the rules point. Half-orcs, half-elves. I hate half-orcs. I've said that before in previous videos. Gnomes. I love gnomes. The halves were included so that they could be statted for, so that they could be somewhat limited, because half-orcs tend to... half-orc player characters are always big, brute, strong, got constitution of 23, stuff like that. They were buffed up characters, and so we felt it was necessary to stat them to show where they fit into the structure that was AD&D. Gnomes, I thought, was a wonderful addition, and in my world, gnomes are very reminiscent of the bankers in the Potter movies, except they make amazing. They're tinkerers, and they make amazing devices. Let's see. The Bard. Well, the Bard was a favorite ideal of Gary's, because he was enamored of the troubadour of the Middle Ages and thought that would be a really neat position. And of course, the original bards had to be able to defend themselves. They had to be able to show themselves to be sly and tricky, and then they could become a bard. Well, the bardic tradition is heavily influenced by the Celtic mythos and the Druids, etc. Those are all kind of intermeshed way back in time. And bards, like Druids, had degrees that they went through. And Gary liked that idea, and so that's how they got levels, and they were polished in first edition so that they weren't the same. They were advanced. We felt they made them better. We felt that we corrected a lot of mistakes and filled in a lot of omissions that might have been done the first time around. What are your thoughts on handouts in sessions? Generally, no. Have I used them? A few occasions. To what extent? Well, if there was a map fragment and it was very primitive and it didn't put me out unduly to make 6 little scrawls relatively the same, and everybody can have their own map fragment, I don't care. If it's some rune or symbol or whatever, I might print it up enough times that I can cut them up and let the players have one, just so that especially if there's going to be others. I might make it a little easier on them. Um, whenever I run the Wheel of Blame, of course, I hand out a pre-generated character sheet. um, if there's a complex backstory, I might print that up and give it out and say, here it is. You got 5 minutes. Read it, and I'll take questions for 5 minutes afterwards, and then we're going. If you do have that handout at the beginning, well, then you can prove that everybody had the same information from the get-go. That's one way of covering your butt. And this person references that some people go as far as props of unique items and treasure. Well, I use a prop in the Wheel of Blame. This coin/token is a necessary part of the Wheel of Blame. And other than that, I don't recall, though. This was a prop in my first campaign, in that they found this early and tried to figure out what it meant and where they would use it and all that, all throughout the rest of the story arc. No, not as a rule. I don't use them. And again, what I do now doesn't lend itself well to props, so I don't have any use for them. But if I were to, go to some big whoopie-doo convention and asked to run a story adventure or whatever, well, that would depend on the story as opposed to the Wheel of Blame type thing that I do now. All right, this is concurring with something I said about all the multitude of classes that really just boil down to the originals. And then about how the race choices maybe, but he sees them as, well, this person sees them, and remember, I'm old school, and I assume, through force of 73 years of habit of assuming a male pronoun. Let's see where I lost my place after I had to make sure I didn't offend anybody. Race, more muddied waters as well, yeah, and yeah, okay, if you want to make it, if you want to make races as divisions in humans, that's one thing. Whereas when I think of races in D&D, I think of orcs and goblins and demons, and the various groups of people. That's how I look at it. It's not that it's not fun once in a while, but it builds an unsatisfied mentality that directs players to, if I don't have a massive amount of choices, I just can't get into it and play what I really want to play. Well, yeah, and it's a good reason to stay away from it, too. Very good reason. Too many choices, muddy the waters, and it takes too long to get to start having fun, especially if you can't really make up your mind and commit. Whereas where you have the original choices, you are now committed to a path through life. How you negotiate that path is entirely up to you and your future gameplay. Do I like to mix sci-fi with my fantasy? Strange visitors from the stars coming down to a dirt farming village, ancient civilization deep underground with unimaginably advanced technology the characters probably wouldn't even cover, that sort of thing. The latter, no. I've written and self-produced, self-published an adventure called Tower of Fire. some kind of tower. Anyway, I wrote it a number of years ago. I found one on the shelf back here behind the stone wall. And I purposely wrote it so that somebody that wanted to play sci-fi could use it, or somebody that wanted to play fantasy could use it, because Pillar of Fire, or I don't, anyway, something like that. This tower appears and has minions out gathering things. Now, you can explain it as a wizard out on a super powerful wizard out on a collecting expedition, or foraging for that matter. Or you could take it as a craft, because all the illustrations in it and all the quote monsters, meaning everything that isn't a player character, are all automatons. So they could be clockwork, or they could be more than that. And I purposely did it that way. And the interior of the tower has collection areas that could go either way. Could go sci-fi, could go fantasy. I really didn't intend for them to run together, but running the fantasy players up against these, if you make the droids, or whatever they are, automatons, if you make them relatively weak, they couldn't be, fission powered, and because they'd chop them up to bits. But it was there. Unfortunately, it was another case of me giving too much credit to DMs being able to take the germs of an idea and run with them. No rule books at the table is the best rule ever. God, it cuts down the arguing. Yes, isn't it delightful? And after all, every one of the early rule books says these are guidelines, not rules. And every time you sit down at somebody's table, or they sit down at yours, the assumption is made that this is your world, or the DM's world, as the case may be. How do I get in contact with the surviving members of the original crew? This is a reply to my last question about the love and history of OD&D. If you mean the original crew from TSR, the only originals left alive of the first core group are Terry Kuntz, who roughed in and built the Dungeon Hobby Shop, and also was a player at Gary's Table, and me. Now, if you're talking about the original crew of my group from Carbondale, beats me. I could probably get a hold of one or two, and they may, in turn, each of them may have kept in touch with somebody. I don't know. So I'm not sure which crew you're asking about here. But the only... Well, Kevin's ostensibly alive somewhere. Mike Carr is still alive. Tom Wom's still alive. But if you're talking about the original crew, the 5 of us that started all the ball thing rolling, just me. So I'm not sure who you mean. There ain't a hell of a lot of us left. Okay, here we go. I love this, these elitist magic user players. Here's the thing about magic users and whether or not they need to crawl through muddy and bloody adventures with warriors, rogues, and clerics. Magic users tend to be the proverbial nerds and brains of the party in fantasy world. There's going to be any kind of Mary Sue, it's got to be a damn wizard. They're the ones who can do their own scholarly academic research the most. They're the ones who specialize type of crawling through muddy and bloody is scavenging grimoires, tomes, and libraries and sages. The wizards garner information and intelligence. They're the investigators of the bunch. Just like in real life, if scrawny, nerdy, unathletic, geeky guys were to be formidably, militantly defensive and wanted to do some serious damage against a way bigger, brutal bully tyrant monster, beyond a direct confrontation for a fight, it might be of an advantage to learn about manufacturing his own explosive pyrotechnics and means to level the playing fields. Some kind of advance outside the box of getting dragged along by less intelligent, dorky party members as an adventure needs to happen. Well, see, there's that snotty point again about less intelligent. Who says? I've played 18 intelligence fighters. Damn, nothing I can't figure out a way to do. All right, now this one had a reply. That's why they got to learn how to ask the local yokels a lot of questions, do meaningful recon, and even run and hide in order to live another day. That is the stuff of what happens outside the box. Agreed. Yeah, you got to get muddy. Nah. Too damn bad. I was wondering if you have any recollections of the game Star Probe, a sci-fi game that came out about the same period as the original D&D booklets, and whether there are any plans that you knew of to develop it beyond the initial release. Well, yeah, I know about Star Probe. It came into existence entirely outside of my cognizance, in that I was working on D&D and magazine and newsletter, etc. And then all of a sudden, here's Star Probe coming from the printers. There was a mindset amongst the early companies back then that they got one of those, so I need one of those too. Evidence, Tunnels and Trolls. A blatant knockoff. Well, Star Probe was an appeal to the people that played Traveler. It was purposely less complex, certainly in character generation, but it was an appeal to hit the Star Wars market. They got one, we need one. Fantasy Games Unlimited had to go Oriental. They didn't want to go medieval, so they went with Bushido. It was a frame of mind back then that all the companies wanted to have everything, and it didn't always work out. We tried to put out a couple of interesting historical games, and people wouldn't buy into the idea that we could do anything other than D&D. Were there any plans beyond? I don't believe there were. Plans beyond generally revolved around. They generally revolved around sales. If it sold really well, good. Let's cash in on that badge again. And that was a big spur for another book. Regarding the non-adventuring wizard in the AD&D and second edition DMG, there's an optional rule that says the wizard can get 50 experience point per spell level cast to overcome foes or problems. In this way, I guess you could play a wizard who sets up shop in a tower and helps out the locals and whoever comes to him, but takes ages and ages to gain a level. Not much fun to play. I guess that's what NPC wizards do to get more powerful. Well, let's stop here a minute. Do you suppose that Saruman and Sauron and Gandalf just woke up one day as potent wielders of magic? That they didn't have an apprenticeship, a learning period? Because in most of the fantasy, or in a lot of the fantasy, wizards are able to live to a ripe old age. But you can bet that Sauron and Saruman and Gandalf and any other wizard you want to name served an apprenticeship somewhere. They weren't always 186 years old. Everybody comes up from somewhere. You don't just have the good fairy Griselda or whatever from the Wizard of Oz come whack you with her magic wand, and all of a sudden, you're 156 years old and all the accumulated knowledge. So there's a response to this. I have a really simple house rule for players who don't want their magic users to risk their necks adventuring and dungeon crawling. For every 5 years of continuous study, their PC goes up 1 level. That is, not in-game session hours, but 5 years in real Earth time. So if you want your wizard to reach 4th level and learn a few 1st and 2nd level random spells he figured out along the way, come back with that character sheet to my game table in 15 years. So far, nobody has taken up my offer. Not too surprising. All right. I'm going to end tonight on an upbeat thingy that I just found out about. And I think it's an idea worth thinking about. There's this is from the Movers and Shakers of Cincinnati. One of the librarians finds all kinds of stuff about gaming and photocopies them for me. And Cincinnati has an ethics center, which is an outreach program to, it's a good deal. It's not all, sky blue stuff. And they've teamed with the region's library system to teach kids about ethics through gaming. And they're going to use, and I'm going to have to put my specs on here because I just got this afternoon and was fascinated by it. They're going to use D&D to do it, to emphasize critical thinking, community, and creativity. And they say that, D&D is an amazing way to strengthen the social and emotional skills of young people in a way that's both fun and creative. Agreed. And they got these super geeks running it. And if they make 3 sessions, they get a D&D die. So, they're waving carrots. Now, I was delighted to see it and just, oh, God, I wish somebody had gotten a hold of me. Because I would have loved to participated in doing this. Because I can see, and this is why I'm telling you about this, so that you can see some of the things I do and maybe find a way to do this for kids in your group. One of the first things I saw when I said ethics center, I go, well, they won't be murder hobos. Okay, they won't be just going through the countryside killing everything they come across. All right, so they're going to have to be a group. What is a group? A group is a team. They can learn who has various skills that complement each other in a team. Back to ethics. If a team member is down and out, do you leave them? If not leaving them means that you might risk hazard, hard decisions. It's play, but it's hard decisions. It's creative thinking. Let's see. Critical thinking. Do this, do that. Do this, do that. And lots of younger individuals have not had a lot of instances in their life where they had to make a snap decision. Well, hey, get some practice. Thinking about, you can teach good in how you structure the adventures, always going after a foe that's clearly evil. You don't want any gray lines here. You're clearly evil because you're trying to teach good behavior here. Clearly evil, clearly delineated, and you have a mission, and getting around the guardhouse should be just as rewarding for the group, or even more rewarding than just, slaying the guards. You want to keep reminding everybody, remembering everybody that this is fun, this is fantasy. So you want to, I would say, you want to make sure you have enough elements of fantasy, pixies and fairies and stuff like that, not just, orcs and goblins. I think this is a great idea. Creativity, thinking outside the box. I'm especially attracted to that because that's what the whole Wheel of Blame is, thinking outside the box. Different ways to overcome an obstacle to obtain what you're going for. On the wheel, it's obtaining a token from each encounter. In this, you could have you could have a long-term goal. It's going to be tough at first to get a group to gel because you're going to have attendance problems and interest problems, and it might take 3 or even 4 tries to get a group that has enough fun that says, yeah, okay, we're coming back Wednesday night or Tuesday afternoon, summer games, whatever. But what a neat idea. One of many things that I think that role-playing and gaming can be used. When I was at GaryCon, I did a brief interview with the Wounded Warrior Project and what I thought about what positive benefits games and game playing could have for guys that are coming back and still working things out. And I believe that's possible. So on that positive note, I think I'll end this one tonight. And let's see. Yeah, I got a string here where I'll be doing them pretty regularly for quite a while. So get ready to be bored. Nah, I hope not, Jesus. Oh, please, please subscribe. Please, please leave comments, ask questions. And most importantly, go to the Patreon and please help support it. I have a $22 in the bargain bin camera I've been making this out of. I need to get a better camera. I need to get some better lighting, not just the 2 lights overhead. And I want to make this a little more pleasurable to watch, not just fun to listen to with my droll and snarky wit. On that note, I'll say, Dodada Govi.
Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Last man around when them rates went down. Called it Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine. He's a curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller. The curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. ESR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree.
High as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Curmudgeon.